So welcome to this yoga concepts yoga space session for a new module, and I'll introduce to you in a moment the concept that we're exploring during this session. And as with all of the yoga space modules, we'll then use this concept as our lens of awareness as we come to each of the other sessions through the month and in between. So just a reminder to look out for follow-ups that I'll share in between, so that you can really start to explore this concept and how you might apply it to your practice on the mat and to life off the mat. So I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see some of the terms and ideas that I'm throwing around here. So can you see that okay?
Absolutely fine. Yeah.
Correct. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so very quick reminder and very quick whistle-stop tour of what you'll already be familiar with from watching the Introduction to Yoga Concepts session, and that is the 8 limbs of yoga. And you see all kinds of different representations of this. I quite like this kind of representation with petals. It really gets across that these elements are not intended to be a linear representation of linear progress, like you start at one point and make your way through to a final point. It's very much a layered thing, but just a reminder that if anything, when you look back over yoga texts, then the message that certainly really comes through to me is, if you're going to start anywhere, start with the yamas and the niyamas. Those kinds of concepts or approaches to life, to yourself, to your interactions with others and with yourself. Start with those as your foundation, and then these other limbs of yoga, build on that. But if you're going to start anywhere, start with the yamas and the niyamas. So it's the yamas that we're drawing from at the moment in our yoga concepts, and we've already explored ahimsa, which we explored through the ideas of loving kindness. And in this module, we're going to explore the concept of Satya. So Satya, Sanskrit word, Sanskrit being the ancient Indian language of yoga. So if we break that down, Sat is most often translated as truth, or we can think of it as being like true essence, and Ya means really. So it's just really emphasizing that, like real truthfulness, and often referred to as or translated as honesty. And just to labor a point that I'll probably labor each time we do these concept sessions is Sanskrit is a really complex language, and I am I only have scratched the surface of it, if that. But certainly there are no straightforward translations that you can make with these words, and part of what we're doing in these concept sessions really is kind of delving into the multi-layered meanings of these words and kind of what they contain. So that's what we'll be doing really. But as a kind of like a quick reference point as the sort of idea that we're exploring here, we can think of Satya as being around truth, being around honesty. So if we think around that idea of truth and honesty, I mean, really what I've put down here are the kinds of words and therefore ideas or concepts that come to mind for me when I think about the practice of truthfulness or honesty. So as with each of the yamas, certainly on the face of it, it seems quite obvious, like, yes, it's a good idea to be honest, just as with ahimsa, it's a good idea to not be violent. So on that kind of surface level, you know, it doesn't seem that complicated. Let's agree to be honest. But we can quickly start to kind of delve a little deeper than that. So, for example, I've got on here transparency, clarity. So that idea of there not being a kind of there not being any kind of disingenuousness or kind of veil over whatever I might be communicating to others or indeed to myself. And then sort of following on from that come ideas around trustworthiness, integrity, communicating and behaving in a way that's authentic, you know, our deeds match our words and so on. So, you know, not obscuring things. So yes, so already just from that we can perhaps start to get a sense of how, you know, simply the concept of honesty isn't just a straightforward, like, make sure you always tell the truth. So as with each of the yamas, what we're thinking about here is how can we think about practicing honesty in our thought, word, and deed. So our actions, the words we might say out loud to others, to ourselves, the thoughts that might be running through our mind, and the words that we might actually say to ourselves in our heads. And we are being encouraged to think about how we practice that honesty, that truthfulness with others and with ourselves. So we're going to focus in on the idea and explore some ideas around practicing honesty, practicing truthfulness with yourself. And as a starting point, I want to delve into this idea of connecting to that within you that is unchanging. So in particular, I just want to mention before I go further on this, just make the point that, of course, when I share in these concept sessions, it's on the basis of research and things that I've read, and, you know, so I have prepared carefully in that way. And also it is very much a case of communicating my experience of that concept, like communicating from my own experience. And really, I mean, it's one of the things that I really appreciate about yoga is that fundamentally it is an experiential practice. All of these concepts, practices that I share with you in YogaSpace are all simply invitations for you to then explore and experience in whatever way resonates for you. And I mention that now because it particularly feels like that is the case for me with Satya. So connecting to that you that is unchanging. So if we think about how we experience life day to day, we tend in our daily life to bring awareness to have our awareness on the thoughts that are going through our heads, the feelings that we're feeling, maybe perhaps how we might be feeling in our bodies, the events going on around us, and that's as it should be, you know, as human beings, existing in our bodies, like having minds that think, you know, experiencing emotions, having things going on around us, and interacting with those things external to us. You know, that is how we navigate through the world, and in doing so we bring awareness to each of those things. We notice and entertain, and focus in on or move away from the thoughts that we're thinking, the emotions that we're feeling, and so on. So anything that we experience. And that's fine, you know, that's fine that we bring our awareness. So we should, in order to function and interact effectively with ourselves as well as in the world. So I might, for example, be sitting here now, like a lot of my thoughts are around the concept of Satya and around what I'm communicating to you right now. Maybe I'm also experiencing, thinking, like I'm hungry right now, I'm gonna have some lunch after this. Maybe I didn't sleep well last night and I'm thinking, you know, I'm feeling tired. Yeah, so maybe after this I go out into the street and oh, I don't know, like I'm experiencing being cold, you know, whatever it might be. So the point is that all of these things come and they go. They are ever changing. So at any given moment, I might be thinking about Satya, and then I might be thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch. At any given moment, I might be feeling content. I might be feeling hungry. I might be feeling full. I might be feeling anxious. Whatever, you know, these things come and they go. They are ever changing. And so the mistake that we make is to identify with these ever changing things and say, this is who I am. So the concept of Satya invites us to entertain the idea that I am not my thoughts, my feelings, my actions. And if there's one thing that I really encourage you to take away from this session and spend some time reflecting on, journaling on, it's this suggestion. And you know, if I didn't want to, you know, I want to make sure that we stick to time. Otherwise, I would leave some time and some space to really let that land, because this can be, for many of us, really quite a radical suggestion to entertain. So I encourage you to spend some time with that if you can afterwards, and notice what comes up. You know, notice what responses or reactions come up. Maybe there's a real resistance to it, or whatever. Maybe it really resonates, but just noticing. You are not your thoughts, your feelings, your actions. So I put the word ego here, which I think is a sort of a helpful concept to bring into this idea. So the ego, if we're talking in yogic terms, we can understand the ego as being a psyche that is programmed to bundle up all these ideas of who we are, and to protect that. So it carefully constructs this identity of who we are, and then works very hard to protect that. So perhaps we might identify with and think of ourselves as being, I don't know, like maybe we really pride ourselves on our kindness, you know, let's like, so this isn't all a negative thing. This is a, you know, this is who we are as human beings. Maybe we pride ourselves on our kindness, or maybe we pride ourselves on our efficiency, or, you know, maybe we have stories around that we tell ourselves around maybe we think of ourselves as being an impatient person, or like quick to temper, or you know, whatever it might be. What we then make the mistake of doing is saying, you know, I am kind, or I am efficient, or I am quick tempered, or whatever it is, and we say that is who we are. And so one way to kind of, if that's feeling kind of difficult to get under the skin of as an idea, then something that I've found really helpful, and this might be something that you've come across before, but to entertain it and practice it with this context, with this background of thinking about Satya, I've found particularly helpful, is rather than saying to yourself, I am kind, or I am efficient, or I am angry, then instead just subtly shifting that to being, you know, I'm doing a kind thing right now, or I am feeling angry right now. And so what that does is just create a little bit of space between the action, or the feeling, and yourself. So rather than it being who you are, so let's take the I am angry, like I am angry, you know, that sentence in itself, you know, suggests like that is who you are, I am angry. Rather, you're saying I am experiencing anger right now. So really it's a subtle reminder to yourself, to your psyche, that is a changing state. You know, that anger is not something that is you forever. It is what you're experiencing right now. It's come and it will go. And so by creating that space between yourself and the feeling, or the thought, or the action, whatever it might be, what we're also doing is reminding ourselves and encouraging ourselves to come to a place that is still ourselves, but that is not that feeling, that thought, that action. So what we're reminding ourselves of is that there is a part of you that observes that action, thought, emotion. A part of you that is not that thought, not that feeling, not that action, but a part of you that observes. And that part of you is the unchanging part of you. That is the part of you that observes, and we practice it in our yoga. We practice it each time we bring our awareness to the breath, each time we observe ourselves, like fully present in a pose. Each time we meditate, we are being encouraged to arrive into that stiller, quieter place within you from which you observe. And from that place of observation, you are then not only creating some space between you and those ever-changing things that come and go, but you are also practicing arriving into that unchanging part of yourself. So yeah, I've mentioned here on this slide about chitta-vritti, which is primarily refers to the fluctuations of the mind, but you know, just another term that, you know, if you're particularly interested in the concepts and terms, you might want to make note of. But this idea that, you know, these things, these thoughts, feelings, they come and they go. They fluctuate, and there is a a place within us that is unchanging. So we'll circle back round to that, but what I also just wanted to share is this idea that Satya is also, as well as being that which is unchanging within us, also this idea around it being reality viewed without distortion.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah.
This is the idea that we perceive everything through a lens of judgment. And judgment, I was trying to think whether there was a different word I could use, because that feels a bit loaded. It feels quite negative, doesn't it? But it's the way we operate as human beings, is that everything that we perceive, so all of these, so thinking about these ever-changing things, thoughts, emotions, actions, things going on around us, everything going on around us in the external world, we perceive all of that through our own lens, from our own unique perspective. Every single person perceives all of those ever-changing things through their own lens, and that's fine. You know, that's what it is to be a human being. But again, we then make a mistake, because what we then tend to make the mistake of doing is thinking that, is often anyway, thinking that what we are perceiving is in some way an objective reality or truth.
Mm.
So again, I feel like it's this that we conflate our perception with this idea of truth or reality, rather than creating some space of awareness where we can recognize that there is the us that is perceiving, and then there is the thing that is happening, and there will always be a space between those two things. And I was thinking about examples of this. There are all kinds of ways I could give examples, but I was just thinking of the example of I don't know if you've ever been back to a place that perhaps you went to as a child. Like, I can remember going back and visiting my primary school when I was much older, and it was so much smaller. Like, the whole place was so much smaller than it was when I was a child. And of course, there's no kind of objective truth to that, where like the school had actually shrunk. It was simply that as a child, as a small child, things around me appeared much bigger in relation to me. So that's a sort of simple but hopefully, you know, like effective example that you might be able to relate to, where you know, just to give you that sense of that there is a lens through which we experience and observe and perceive everything. And that's the same, you know, it's not just for those things external to us, but our thoughts, our feelings as well. And so we can certainly think of that in terms of how we might at different points in time perceive our thoughts or our feelings and experience very, very similar or the same thoughts or feelings. We might experience those differently. You know, we might experience a thought around oh, I don't know, like maybe the bus is running late and you're going to be late to work, and maybe one day that brings up feelings of anger or annoyance, and maybe other days it feels like it brings up feelings of anxiety, or maybe it feels absolutely fine and you're quite glad to like have the delay, or but the point is different. You can experience different things at different points, and your own reality at that point is very different. So as I said, the main point here is that we make the mistake of often of thinking that there is some kind of objective truth, rather than creating that slight gap of awareness where what we can see is that we're simply perceiving things through that lens of judgment. So I just want to come back to this idea now of the place from which we observe. So I've got up here now, like kind of 3 key points to make around Satya, and particularly around kind of arriving into that place of truthfulness within ourselves. And it's this idea that of reality viewed without distortion. So really what I would say there is that we're saying we're simply bringing awareness to the fact that there will always be a degree of distortion, and the more we can create the space of awareness around that, then the less distorted. Now, if we think that there will always be our own unique individual lens perceiving things, then bringing awareness to it is like kind of like cleaning that lens, you know, so it's not so cloudy, so we can see things at least a little more clearly. And also this idea of Satya being that which is unchanging in us, which really for me anyway, my experience is that directly relates to arriving into that place within us from which we observe. And that place from which we observe, that unchanging part of us, is what in yogic terms would be referred to as our Atman, so which is often translated as our soul, which might or might not work or resonate for you as a concept, but our Atman, which we can think of as being our true essence, that place within us which is unchanging, that place from which we observe. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, always the invitation and the opportunity for us in our yoga practice is to come to this place, to come to our Atman, come to that place within us which is unchanging, from which we observe. Each time we are invited to observe the body in a pose, to observe the breath, to observe the thoughts going through the mind without attaching to them. We are arriving into that place within us which is unchanging, that place from which we observe. And so I feel like the invitation with exploring Satya in this way is really to, and I suppose it's the invitation with all of these concepts really, but is to keep doing what you're doing in terms of your yoga practice. And as you do, be aware that what you're doing each time you come into that place of observing and of bringing awareness is that you are connecting with your true essence, with the truth of yourself, with that part of you that is unchanging. Your true essence is unchanging. And noticing from that place. So if we think about then using that, accessing that place, that state, if you like, how that can help us in practicing Satya with ourselves, then we could think about that on the mat. And I've got some examples up there. Maybe you notice and bring awareness where you're bringing judgment to your practice, or you're ignoring the body, or perhaps you know, and that might be staying in your comfort zone, or ignoring injury and pushing your body, and also just noticing where you're confusing judgment with truth. For example, you know, you're kind of saying, oh, I'm no good at this, or I can do, you know, like having these ideas about yourself that are actually really part of the ego mind, rather than objective truth. So the main point being, the more you can be in that unchanging place, then the more space you have to start to notice these things coming up. And off the mat as well, noticing where you might tell yourself convenient stories, where you might rationalize patterns or actions or thoughts even that don't really serve you. So again, what we're doing is, if we can arrive into that space, that unchanging place within us, then perhaps we can start to notice these times when when this comes up. And as we do that, we can, as we bring awareness to these things, then perhaps we can start to get into the practice of remaining and sitting in awareness with these things rather than turning away. So to give an example on sort of rationalizing actions and not being completely truthful with ourselves, I don't know, like maybe you've if you've committed to going out for a run once a week, and then, you know, the day comes when you'd usually run and it's raining and you're tired because you've had a long day at work, and you can't find your trainers, and it's going to be dinner time soon, and so on and so on and so on. And we tell these stories to ourselves, and can end up spending a lot of energy on rationalizing our actions of hitting the sofa rather than going out for the run, and come to believe it ourselves. What I've tended to notice, the more that I've arrived into that place of truthfulness, that true essence within me, when I notice these actions coming up, one of the things I've noticed is, the more energy I spend on rationalizing something, the more likely it is that what I'm really trying to do is obscure the truth from myself, which is, I don't want to go on that run. Why don't I want to go on that run? You know, let's explore that, you know, and that might then require me to start looking at and sitting with some thoughts and feelings that might feel difficult or challenging. And maybe that's as far as I get, you know, but over time, if I can keep coming back to that quieter, stiller place where there is no judgment, there is just you know, that place that starts to increasingly feel, certainly in my experience, to feel like a safe place to be, where it's okay for me to look at those difficult thoughts or feelings that come up around something. Yeah, so I guess really for me, Satya is very much about a willingness to be vulnerable, to be in full acceptance of everything that comes up about actions, our words, our thoughts, whatever, you know, in their, you know, in their full range, however uncomfortable that might make us feel. Like none of us like to think of ourselves as being or doing anything negative, but of course we do, but like, or what we perceive as negative, and but of course we do all the time, because we're human beings. The Satya is inviting us to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to be in full acceptance of what we perceive to be our imperfections. I think that's as far as I'm going to go in this session. I really wanted to stay focused in on practicing Satya with ourselves. Equally, we could just as easily explore how we might practice Satya with others. So I invite you to go away and reflect on that. And just what I do want to finish on is just this idea that that what we're really asking ourselves here, or what I encourage you to ask yourself through the course of this month's module, is as you bring awareness to actions, to your thoughts, to your words, then you're asking yourself, as far as Satya goes, what you're asking yourself is, are they in alignment with my true essence? And then the other point, the final point to make here, is that Satya is intended to be practiced from a foundation of loving kindness. So this comes back to our concept around ahimsa. So ahimsa and Satya, like just two concepts that interweave and complement each other beautifully, I think. So as well as asking yourself, are my actions, thoughts, words in alignment with my true essence? You're also asking yourself, are they in alignment with loving kindness? So this comes to these questions, which you may very well have come across before, often attributed to the Buddha, but no absolutely clear provenance. And often these are posed particularly as a kind of a rule of thumb for when you're interacting with others, equally applied to interacting with yourself. But is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? So I'll just leave that there. And again, if that resonates, you might want to spend some more time reflecting on that. I'm just going to stop sharing. Great. Yeah, so that's everything that I'm going to share on Satya now. I'm very happy to stick around for discussion, and just like maybe just give me the nod, Tricia, whether you'd like to do that on recorded or off recorded. Totally happy with either. And equally, if you want to head off now, of course, do.
Am I muted or not?
No,
Can
I
you
can hear
you? No, that's fine. That's what I thought. Yeah, to say, I mean, I found this really, really interesting, and it's lovely to visit it again. Because, you know, you couldn't visit it too often, really. And I think it really resonates with me of the work that I've been doing probably over the last 10 years or so. This idea of really discovering my true essence and being able to recognize what is and what is ego and all the other things. And I think for soul is the word that I perhaps most resonate with. But all the things that we've been talking about, you know, reaching that increasing awareness of being able to observe, why am I thinking that? And being aware of that before I speak or I respond. If something's triggered me, just having that gap. But it's also in the type of meditation that I practice, this centering prayer. It is a practice about connecting with your true essence, with your soul. And it is about this constant letting go because of all the, you know, the stuff that keeps coming in. And I find that so powerful and so helpful that the more I've done it, that it's sort of, well, I suppose it strengthens it, doesn't it? The more you're able to connect with it, then the less difficult it becomes to be aware of it and for it to practice others. But I'm just, you know, I think there's been just so much in that session that I mean, it's not that it's been a completely new thing, but actually just hearing it again, you hear it slightly differently because I'm in a different place now than 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And just the way that you've presented it, just that slightly different angle. And yeah, it's just been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And there's a lot that I shall take away from that. And I love the connection with the loving kindness, because that kept coming up in my mind, but particularly on the mat, thinking about that yeah, it's
that coming up for you last month when you had loving kindness particularly in mind, that combination with Satya.
Yes, yeah, I think it's just such a, yeah, just great. So yeah, thank you. That's been a really, really great session.
Such a pleasure. And I mean, you mentioned about it a strengthening, you know, as you practice more and more, and certainly that's my experience too. It feels for me that and again, I think this applies to all of it really, doesn't it? But it starts off perhaps as a very conscious practice, and yes, you continue with that conscious practice, and then that, you know, what I've noticed is that it just starts to creep in as it's hard to explain sometimes, isn't it? But that kind of foundational awareness is just there, and sometimes it's more obvious than other times. Sometimes it might get more deeply buried, but it's certainly there to access more readily. And so it I guess that's when it really starts to come off the mats. And you know, if you can, and that's why quite often in the follow-ups I might say things like trust in the process, like just keep going with the practice, because the impact that has is so much greater than you kind of think it is at the time. Yes, it might have a positive impact at the time. You know, you do that practice, whatever kind of practice it is, and you come away from that feeling, you know, more positively in whatever ways. But it, you know, the cumulative effect of continuing to do it and continuing to do it certainly does for me feel like there starts to be this more permanent state of just there being that slight gap, as we talked about, that slight gap of awareness.
And that momentary gap between what's actually happening and the thinking about it.
Yeah.
And just that, it's a book I read recently was called Practice the Pause, and it was very much about that. And it's very much a book about centering prayer, but it's the sort of behind it all. But one of the things that she particularly has been interested in is how the recent brain science with the functional MRIs is able to demonstrate changes in the brain structure that strengthens the ability to be able to think rather than to react. And it is very, very powerful. And I do think it gets easier as you get older. I mean, I think it's a sort of second half of life thing, that there's the first half of life is so busy in creating ourselves and creating our world and who we are.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, there's that opportunity then to think, well, I've created this. What actually is the essence of it? Who am I in this?
Yeah.
The sort of second half of life. So I think it's not surprising that it's often at that sort of time that people turn to yoga, or they find other ways of actually looking beyond the practicalities and the immediate getting through the day.
Yes.
It's a different thing. So
Yeah,
just brilliant. Thank you so much, Heidi. It's been absolutely lovely.
Such a pleasure. Let me just turn off the